At the 2019 Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, the presence of China's Defense Minister Fenghe has attracted a lot of attention. It's the first time in 8 years that such a high-ranking Chinese official is representing the country at the conference. And the central topic shaping all items on the agenda is entrenchment. Can cooler heads prevail for coexistence between the United States and China? Or will the world be pushed into another damaging era of a Cold War? In the first half of our program today, I'll speak with Wang Dong, Deputy Executive Director at the Institute for China-U.S. People-to-People Exchange at the Peking University. And later on, I'll be joined by David Gordon, Senior Advisor for Geoeconomics and Strategy at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to our dialogue, Dr. Wang Dong. As is customary, the U.S. Secretary of State would always take the center stage at the first day of each Shangri-La Dialogue here in Singapore. What do you think of the major remarks? I mean, what do you think of the major points that he delivered? What were the thoughts that initially crossed your minds upon hearing what he said?
Well, there was actually a question from the audience during the Q&A session. It's sort of in half, joking tone, saying that every U.S. Secretary of Defense comes and delivers sort of the same speech, talking about repeat the same themes, etc., and emphasizing United States is here to stay, etc., etc. And that's an interesting moment of sort of exchange, I think, between the audience and also Mr. Shanahan. And he went on to try to stress there are three differences, during his speech, so to speak. And of course, there was apparently, without naming China, sort of implicit criticism toward China, but then toward the second, I think, part of his speech, he was then put more emphasis on the cooperation with China. And then during Q&A, he again emphasized the competition really doesn't mean conflict, and he repeated that actually twice. And also he talked about the the importance of keeping the line of communication and how to cooperate with China. So afterward, my impression, if to summarize like in one sentence, I would say it impressed me as a Mr. Shanahan trying to project the U.S. image being tough, but without being very aggressive or provocative or confrontational.
But he's only the acting secretary. He got a lot of margin for reservations. He will not fully display his own position on the military build-up of the United States, and he vows that the U.S. military would be the strongest to safeguard stability and peace in the Indo-Pacific region. But what is the crucial message that he delivered about the so-called Indo-Pacific region?
Well, I think, of course, first of all, he was trying to, lay out some of those sort of pillars of the Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States, and I think they are similar. A couple of things are very similar themes of the Trump administration. For instance, respect of sovereignty. This is something I would say very, very unique to the Trump administration. I think I cannot recall that any previous U.S. administration actually talk about respect of sort of sovereignty, but this is something into, I think, the mind of President Donald Trump. Then, of course, a lot of the very conventional themes of, to build up. I think he spent a lot of time talking about. Now, it's one of the differences he actually emphasized. Now he came sort of in with resources needed coming from U.S. Congress authorization, coming from support of President Donald Trump, etc. Now then he got the resources to back up all those rhetoric about how to really maintain a very strong U.S. military presence in the region. And that, of course, become then he talk about sort of hinted this criticism about not upholding or violation of the rules and norms, and how the United States, will fight to uphold those things. And those are not new themes, I think, in the speeches delivered by U.S. Secretary of State over the years. So So I think, generally speaking, I think because the Indo-Pacific strategy actually was out there for some time, and he didn't, of course, bring anything completely, surprising, but he was repeat a lot of the pillars that have already been emphasized by the Trump administration.
It doesn't come as a surprise, Dr. Wang, that the heads of the American or Chinese PLA delegations would always keep in mind their domestic audience. Mm-hmm. Their performance here on the special occasion at the Shangri-La Dialogue would always aim to be delivered to the skeptical and very critical audience, either in the DC or in Beijing. With the decline in bilateral trust in both cases, on both sides, in your case, you've been rejected the visa. Do you think sensibility would, be the barometer in examining this relationship? What are your sentiments, first of all, other than the sober mind as an academic from Peking University?
First of all, I think the current, the American narrative about China, there's a lot of actually sort of emotion, a lot of fear, a lot of prejudice, even paranoia going to that. So it's not a completely sort of rational discussion going on in the United States. Some people, some of my American colleagues, friends even call it the now, definitely we clearly see the emergence of new McCarthyism going on in the United States. Those are all troubling signs. And frankly, I think, from the, you also ask about sort of our impression, Chinese. When we look at that, I think we really think it is a crucial moment. I think we have to really, I think, manage these bilateral relations very carefully.
It's the issue of crisis management.
Yeah, exactly.
Featured more prominently for
right.
both sides, the United States and China. But as a scholar who seriously engaged in American studies for decades, mm-hmm. does what happens today threaten to negate what you have done previously? Namely, you have to forget about what you have done, and you look forward, you have developed a sense of pessimism.
To be very honest, I think I'm an optimist person, generally speaking. But over the past sort of year and a half, the months, I've been really looking at the development in U.S.-China relations, particularly the American narrative about China, thinking toward China. There's definitely more pessimism, comes. But I also want to emphasize that there's also a very strong, this is something I think American colleagues really need to look very carefully, because if you compare Prime Minister Li Qianlong's dinner speech and Mr. Shanahan's keynote speech, there's very clear, very big perception gap between what the region perceives China and what the United States perceive China. And why there's a gap, you just cannot just ignore that. I think
very quickly, this question about the response of ASEAN.
Yeah.
Somehow the voice of Prime Minister Li Qianlong of the host country represents, hopefully, consensus of this regional bloc, ASEAN, right. The 10-member regional bloc. Do you think it's more about an appeal for right. peaceful solution instead of a mil-to-mil confrontation
exactly.
over the issue of South China Sea?
Yeah, exactly. South China Sea, not surprisingly, came up a couple of times. So I think the regional, countries, ASEAN's, the attitude toward that is very clear. Don't just try to demonize China, because China, you have to look at it in really with sort of level head has to prevail, and you just cannot just come to this debate discussion with this kind of emotion and or even paranoid and just fear, or even worse, sort of racist prejudices. That's the worst, something we have to reject. So I think that voices are also very strong. I think in the other ministers from the region during their speeches. Questions from the regional participants. I think this is something definitely I think the U.S. Leaders, officials, senior officials needs to really listen to and carefully and pay attention to.
You spoke of Senator McCarthy's hysteria at the height of the Cold War. But some of the Chinese may politely disagree with you because what we call McCarthy's hysteria only lasted for about 4 to 5 years. What are your expectations for the outcome of the upcoming elections?
Oh, I think it's, of course, a lot of talking about the upcoming U.S. election, presidential election, a lot of uncertainty goes into that. I think the least things we, predictable is about really election. So it's going to be a very competitive election, and of course, both Democrats and the Republicans were fighting very fiercely on a wide range of policy issues. But you're right. You just noted that when it comes to China, there is an emerging consensus in the United States among both Democrats and Republicans, and that's why also, I regard this as something worrisome because you need to really bring back, this sense, right? This cool-headedness, this soul-mindedness, this rationality into this debate about China. Yes, we are undergoing this trade disputes or trade war. A lot of differences between China and the United States that need to be resolved, sought out, hopefully, in a peaceful, more constructive manner. But in the long term, I think this more hawkish attitude, those people who advocating the decoupling of the two economies or even advocating a new Cold War, I really don't think they are sort of fully supported by the majority of American public or American sort of establishment. That's more divisive, I think, opinions even in the United States. And secondly, I think this is also, I think it's very important, I think, at this moment for us to really to engage and talk. I remember so clearly, I think Mr. Shanahan, both in his speech and in the Q&A, he mentioned twice his meeting with Minister General Wei Fenghe was very right, very good, and he said he presented this book, as a gift, and us to try to signify the importance of communication. So I think clearly, from what we see from Mr. Shanahan's his words, his rhetoric, also there is a clear sense in the United States that meal-to-meal relations. There has to be something to stabilize these bilateral relations. You just cannot, let everything sort of off the track, and which, of course, will be too dangerous.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wang Dong. I really appreciate what you said. Just wondering aloud if John Bolton or Navarro agree with you, despite your reconciliatory tone to shape the future of this most consequential bilateral relationship.
I think history will speak for that, and disagree whether they agree or disagree. I think we stand by history. So
take a break. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Still to come on Dialogue, Young Ray will be joined by David Gordon, Senior Advisor for Geoeconomics and Strategy at the International Institute for Strategic Studies.
I'm actually of the view that it's more likely than not that there will be some kind of an agreement reached between China and the United States to resolve the trade dispute. I think that both countries and both leaders have so much to lose by not reaching an agreement that it may take longer than people hope.
Welcome to our show, David.
My pleasure to be here.
Right. The same question. First of all, what was your immediate response to the policy speech that Secretary Shanahan delivered at the very first plenary session of this Shangri-La Dialogue, the 18th of its kind?
I think he talked about the themes. A lot of this, of course, was for a domestic U.S. audience. And I think he spoke to the domestic audience about the fact that the Congress had provided sufficient financial support to the Defense Department, and that we have been present, we the U.S. have been present in Asia, of course, for 70 years, during which time East Asia has been completely transformed. We've been a source of stability during that time. These are long-standing themes in U.S. Viewpoints towards the U.S. role in this part of the world. I think that the new element here was that he was a little bit more forward-leaning in being critical about the Chinese role, although without really naming China, but it was clear that he was talking about China. I think he spent more time on that than any other speech by a U.S. Defense Secretary, so that was one element. But at the end, I think he made several statements that were statements of moderation. One of them was when he said that the U.S. Firmly recognizes that all of the countries in this region have a right to trade and engage with any other country they want. So I think that the notion here that there was some concern, particularly in the ASEAN states, that the U.S. was looking for countries to clearly take sides. And I think he went out of his way to suggest that that was not the case. And then at the end, I was quite struck by several times he referred to his meeting with General Wei, and did so in a very positive format. So I think, I mean, the fact of the matter is that right now, tensions between China and the U.S. really aren't focused on military issues. At some point they might be. At some times in the past they have been. But right now, I don't think the military dimension is even near the top of the list of issues really between the two countries.
Do you think the United States will probably deliver a wrong message to Taiwan? Look, you can use the blank check. You enjoy the unconditional military backing of the Pentagon, of the United States, of the free world, quote unquote. And so DPP, the pro-secession party in the island, would say, let's face the mainland down. What do you think of the dangers and the implications of such confrontational attitude?
Yeah, so I think that I don't believe we're heading towards any kind of a confrontation over Taiwan in the short run. I don't believe that the DPP will move to go beyond the I think, well understood boundaries of behavior that have been in place for 40 years. That is, the U.S. will support Taiwan, but Taiwan will not attempt to make any serious move towards exiting the framework of the ambiguities of the relationship towards China and outside of the framework of the U.S. One China policy. So I don't think we're heading to that. I worry about Taiwan because I believe over time that's the issue in which U.S.-China relations could face the possibility of a military conflict.
As Chas Freeman said in one of his articles recently, you know, he said currently what happens in the D.C. is a chaotic inconsistency for almost all agencies and departments be it in the Pentagon, the State Department, the DC across the aisle, all parties are competing, edging against each other to deliver their own voice. So President Trump has basically lost the control. That's what he said in the article about hostile coexistence. Do you think this is likely to be ended, to be suspended with the 2020 election looming larger?
So that's an interesting question. I mean, I'm actually of the view that it's more likely than not that there will be some kind of an agreement reached between China and the United States to resolve the trade dispute. I think that both countries have, and both leaders have so much to lose by not reaching an agreement that it may take longer than people hope. And
obviously, President Trump needs to have a win before the election. He needs to impress his die-hard electorate, we need a win. But he kept saying, look, China really wants to have a deal.
Yeah, I still think that a deal is the pathway forward. I mean, as I look at the broader issue of our two countries, I think that both China and the United States have sort of become unhappy about the outcome of interdependence. On the other hand, neither side is going away. This is not the end of the Cold War.
This is not the end of the war. This is not the end of the world. Like Francisco Fukuyama said.
Right. So we have
neither are we the last man.
No, we have to find a way to get along. And, you know, I think...
Let me ask you this question,
please.
David. The world order since 1648 Westphalian document is actually based on the very notion of a nation-state. However, what unilateralism of the Trump presidency stands for is protectionism and the rise of populism. Let's look at the European Union. Many say to me, look, Yang Rui, the Cold War would not happen. Neither would the policy of containment be made possible without establishing a coalition of the willing, with the European Union being an important part of that. But the European Union says, no, 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 we don't like President Trump, particularly his policy moves on the steel, aluminum, automobiles, climate change, Iran nuclear deal. You name a lot of that. That made Europeans extremely unhappy. So do you think we are entering into a period of warring states?
So it's a very good question. I mean, I think right now that you know, we are definitely entering into a new period. I'm not sure if it's a warring states period, though. I still believe that the U.S. and China are the two significant actors here. I think most of the rest of the world doesn't want them to fight.
We are not sure where the end game would happen, but we are sure for at least one thing. The Cold War theories on balance of terror and mutually assured destruction start to surface at this defining moment about our relationship with Washington and perhaps with the rest of the world. I really appreciate your insightful analysis about this number of issues that concern the collective future for not only our two great nations, but for the rest of the world. I really
very happy.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you. Look forward to being on